The Guidelines 05/2020 on Consent under Regulation 2016/679 document issued by the European Data Protection Board, EDPB, elaborates extensively on the concept of consent within the context of the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. These guidelines are aimed at providing clarity and consistency in how consent is understood and implemented across the European Union. Here's an expanded overview based on the document's contents. Consent under Article 4(11) of the GDPR. Consent is defined as a freely given, specific, informed, and unambiguous indication of the data subject's wishes, involving a clear affirmative action. This section discusses the intricacies of this definition, emphasizing the need for consent to be an active and conscious decision by the data subject. Elements of valid consent. Freely given. The guidelines detail the conditions under which consent can genuinely be considered as freely given, highlighting situations where there is an imbalance of power between the data subject and the controller. Examples include relationships with public authorities and employment contexts, where consent may not be truly voluntary. Specific. Consent must be tied to explicit processing purposes, allowing data subjects to grant permission for distinct processing activities. The necessity for granularity in consent requests is emphasized to avoid a blanket approval that lacks specificity. Informed. For consent to be informed, data subjects must be aware of the identity of the controller, the purposes of processing, and the types of data collected. The guidelines also specify that data subjects should be informed about their right to withdraw consent at any time. Unambiguous indication of wishes. The guidelines clarify that consent requires an explicit action or statement from the data subject, such as ticking a box, and cannot be inferred from passive behavior or pre-ticked boxes. Obtaining explicit consent. Explicit consent is necessary for processing that poses significant privacy risks, such as the processing of special categories of data. The document explains that explicit consent requires a clear and deliberate statement from the data subject, possibly through written or verbal confirmation. Additional conditions for obtaining valid consent. The GDPR imposes additional requirements on controllers to demonstrate that consent was freely given and to facilitate easy withdrawal of consent. This section offers guidance on how controllers can meet these requirements, including maintaining records of how and when consent was given. Interaction between consent and other lawful grounds in Article 6 GDPR. This section discusses the relationship between consent and other lawful bases for processing under the GDPR, emphasizing that consent is just one of several bases and that controllers must identify the most appropriate basis before beginning any processing. Specific areas of concern in the GDPR. Special attention is given to contexts requiring additional protection, such as the processing of children's data under Article 8. The guidelines highlight the need for clear and understandable consent mechanisms, particularly when targeting vulnerable groups. In summary, the Guidelines 05/2020 on Consent under Regulation 2016/679 provide comprehensive insights into the GDPR's consent requirements. By detailing the conditions under which consent is valid and the obligations of controllers, the guidelines play a crucial role in ensuring that data protection practices align with the regulation's core principles, ultimately safeguarding individuals' rights and freedoms concerning their personal data.